This playthrough is rated T for teen.
Chapter 9, Confessions, Los Angeles, December 26, 1980, 9 a.m. It was the last Friday of the year. Unable to quell the shock of the previous night's discoveries, Hyde slept badly and woke up earlier than he'd have liked. He headed straight to the bathroom and took a cold shower in order to calm his nerves and cool his head. He left the bathroom and drained his hair with a towel as he sat down by one of the large speakers near the windows and took a record off the shelf. He mounted it on the turntable and put the needle in place, and soon the mournful sound of the saxophone started drifting from the cloth-covered speakers. He perched himself on the edge of the bed and let the jazzy melody wash over him. A solemn tone somehow drew his mind back to the words Will had spoken to him the previous night. It didn't take you long to realize if you found the Scarlet Star that you went missing 25 years ago, you'd be able to uncover the truth behind your own father's murder, too. Hyde understood now. He needed to know the truth about what happened 25 years ago. He yearned for it, and he was the only one that was capable of unearthing all the facts. He emerged from his trance and realized that the turntable had stopped already. The melody that had enraptured him so was gone now, vanished into the ether. Hyde suited up, and then, with nowhere to go as usual, sat himself firmly on the sofa and drank 2 cups of coffee in a row. Can't just sit here. I've got to do something. Just as he had steeled his resolve, a knock sounded at the door. He poked his head out and saw Dylan waiting expectantly. I'm so anxious to hear the next installment for last night, said Dylan, fraught with excitement. He wanted to know whether Hyde and Will had ended up crossing paths and what they had talked about. Hyde was in no mood to appease the man. You're worried about what was said, aren't you? He accused. That's why you're here to get me to tell you precisely what we talked about. Dylan was defiant in his insistence that he was merely curious, but Hyde couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. What does he want me to know? Suddenly a voice resounded from along the corridor. Here you are, Dylan. I've been looking for you. It was Mags. Dylan promptly broke off his conversation with Hyde and turned towards her. She had apparently received a phone call from Will informing her that he would not be returning to his apartment. She thus asked Dylan to remove Will's remaining things from the room 306, and he scurried off to make a start on the task. Mags turned her attention to Hyde. Have you finalized your moving arrangements yet, Mr. Hyde? Please feel free to let me know as soon as you can. He informed her that while he would indeed let her know in good time, he had some business to take care of before he could move out. Oh, such as what? She inquired. I had to find something. You might be able to help me out with that, actually. Her face grew dark upon hearing Hyde's request, a hint of distaste in her words. She responded that Dylan had told her Hyde was a former detective, and that she knew he was in search for something, but at this precise moment, she had nothing to say to him. Hyde wasn't about to give up without a fight. If you have nothing to say to me, trust me, I have plenty to say to you. I've got questions to ask and things to tell you. Mads expressed some interest in what he had to say to her. What kind of things? So you're listening now. I have a message from a member of Kathy McGrath's family. With a sigh, she answered, Okay, Mr. Hyde, I give in. Shall we say this afternoon at 4 o'clock in my room? He remained in the hallway for a moment, watching her as she strode by. Something in his gut told him that now, at last, he was closing in on the truth. He was back inside his room for only a brief second before the telephone rang. It was Rachel on the other end. Good morning, sweetie. Good news. What is it? You'll see after you've heard this voice. Then came a familiar booming growl. Hyde, it's Ed here. Hyde was overcome with relief. Ed had been discharged even sooner than Rachel had suggested he might be. I figured there's no way you and Rachel would last 5 minutes on your own, so I blew the doc's mind by making a miraculous recovery. Ed was back to his old crotchety old self. Ed asked Hyde for an update on his anonymous order, and Hyde told him that he'd finally discovered the identity of the client. It was, he explained, a resident of Cape West Apartments who had been living there under a false name. In truth, he was the son of Kathy McGrath, who had been murdered at the hotel 13 years earlier. His name was Will McGrath, and he was a lone thief who had managed to find out about Hyde's past. Ed, he told me that my dad broke into Hotel Cape West 25 years ago with the intention of stealing the Scarlet Star. He what? Ed's voice thundered with his usual vigor. This is what he told me. He said that the incident 13 years ago and the one 25 years ago both connected to Nile. Of the two, Hyde continued, he was far more concerned with uncovering the truth behind the event that occurred 25 years ago. But in order to do so, he'd have to locate the Scarlet Star and deliver it to the one responsible for Kathy McGrath's death. Cleared now of his ailments, Ed's voice had a robustness to it as he encouraged Hyde. Hyde, do what you gotta do and keep searching, and don't stop until you've uncovered everything. Ed passed the phone back to Rachel so she could give him some information. Before she could do so, he said, Rachel, keep an eye on him and don't let him push himself too hard. She reassured him that Ed was in good hands, and while a part of her resented being told something so obvious by a lummox like him, she thought it was nice of him to show how much he cared about Ed. She drew the conversation back to the matter at hand. Kyle, you remember you asked me to get a hold of the last article written by Jack Green? Well, I managed to get it for you. The title of the article is The Truth Behind Condor. It was meant to be an ongoing piece, but ended after the first part was published. At the end of the article, the following appears. Rachel read out the final passage of the article. There's a gigantic void behind the organized crime syndicate known as Condor. Condor has managed to evade justice, thwart police investigations, and successfully sell their stolen wares. But it seems unlikely that the group could accomplish any of this without no outside assistance. There's no doubt in this writer's mind that an as of yet undisclosed force has been operating in the shadows behind Condor. Without this force, Condor would not exist. The next part of this article will expose the identity of the shadowy force. Rachel paused for a moment before saying, and that's where the article stops. So, the shadowy force behind Condor remained unidentified. I take you've heard about the recent jewelry thefts, right? She asked him. He had, of course. Some had even taken place quite near to his apartment building. Rachel informed him that the thefts, including those ones, all bore the mark of having been carried out by Condor, and that a TV special about the incidents was to be broadcast at 11 o'clock that morning. After finishing his conversation with Rachel, Hyde waited impatiently for the program to start. He was quite interested to know more about the events that apparently had matched up with Condor's typical MO. At last, 11 o'clock arrived, and he switched on the television. A man wearing glasses appeared on the screen. Good morning, it's time for 5 News. Today we examine the recent spat of jewelry robberies occurring all over the city. A store owner has provided us with an interesting eyewitness account. Who is this mysterious woman that appears on the scene before every robbery? 5 News, as always, is hot on the heels of any lead. The newscaster's image was replaced by that of a jewelry store owner being interviewed. The day before the robbery occurred, a woman came into the shop. I assumed she was just a customer, but she didn't seem to be interested in any items and just wandered around the shop, looking around. I couldn't see her face due to the black hat and sunglasses she wore. She also wore a ring with a diamond flanked on both sides by rubies. It looked incredibly expensive. An artist's impression of the mystery woman appeared on the screen. Based on this image, we have received reports of the same woman appearing at the other robbed stores. Could this woman be the key to solving these cases? The presenter ended the show by posing the open-ended question to the viewers. The mystery woman, she had been described as, Hyde thought back to several days earlier, when he brushed past a woman fitting the exact same description on his way into the building. He convinced that it was the same woman. There was one more detail in the broadcast that captured his interest. It was the ring. He had definitely seen a ring like that before. There was only one way to confirm his suspicion. He would have to ask the ring's owner directly. The second he left his apartment, Tony called out to him, Hey, Hyde! You're just in time. Did you notice anybody come up here just now? Hyde shook his head. Seriously? Tony frowned. I could have sworn somebody did. That's pretty weird. Did you see somebody? Asked Hyde. Hey, now that I think, it's that same woman. The one who was hanging around by the door last week with the hat. That's who I saw coming in here just now. You sure it was her you saw? Positive. Not that matters now I've lost her. One thing's for sure, though. I saw her going up the stairs just ahead of me. Hyde considered the situation. The woman in the hat. Maybe it is who I think it is. After all, why is she involved? He left Tony where he was and knocked on the door of room 206. Mary opened up without any delay. What can I do for you? She asked. How'd your insurance claim go? My insurance claim? She wore a puzzled expression. Yeah, I just really wanted to know. I've been curious about Rex, too, if he ever came back. In response, she said, I must thank you, Mr. Hyde. Thank you for caring enough to come and ask how I'm doing. Yeah, just felt like the right thing to do, he replied. Don't want to leave without knowing, you know. Mary smiled warmly and invited him into her room. The room was just as neat and tidy as before. Mary told him that she'd be leaving at the beginning of the following week. Her rent was all paid up. Did that mean Rex's investigation was closed, thought Hyde? It seemed a little strange. It was nice that the insurance company had agreed to pay her, but wouldn't that have to mean that the investigation had turned up nothing? Hyde remembered hearing that Rex worked on commission and that his cases always went badly for the claimants involved. He told Mary as much, since she didn't seem to be aware of it. He was known for being a very hard-headed investigator. Listen, Mary, you wouldn't be hiding anything from me, would you? What do you imply, Mr. Hyde? I thought we agreed that I told you everything. I'm not so sure it really was everything, though. In particular, the part about the woman in the hat. What? The color instantly drained from Mary's face. Just then, someone knocked at the door. Mary gingerly walked over and opened it, and in the doorway stood Rex's opposing figure. Rex completely ignored Hyde's presence and spoke only to Mary. This morning, the insurance company told me to cease my investigation into you. I want to know exactly how you managed to squirm your way out of this one. She insisted she had no idea, but his rage continued unabated. He again demanded to know what she had done and suggested that Hyde might find it quite interesting as well. The threatening undercurrent in Rex's tone prompted Mary to suddenly start running as fast as she could. She ran straight past him and out the door. Hyde, seethed Rex. I'm not sure what brought you here today, but before you two start planning a wedding, there are a few things you might want to know first. Hyde paid no consideration to Rex's words and chased after Mary. He heard the elevator moving, and when he looked over at it, he saw the floor indicator come to a stop. She had gone out on the roof. As soon as the elevator had returned, he headed up after her. When he stepped out onto the rooftop, Mary was standing there, cold and alone. Hyde needed to hear the truth. What did Rex know about her, he asked. Why had she run away? She simply said, I was scared of him. But she didn't seem eager to tell him why that was. I've been keeping something from you, Mr. Hyde, but I can't bring myself to tell you what it is. Please, Mr. Hyde, just leave me alone. Her voice wavered like it was on the verge of breaking up. He thought he saw a single tear drop roll down her cheek. Hyde's detective instincts told him that she wouldn't talk unless he could show her some kind of evidence. He went back down the stairs towards her room. By the time he reached the room, 206, Rex was already gone. He had let the door open. The first place he looked was the wooden chest. Inside were shoeboxes in all different colors, stacked up on top of one another. This seemed like the perfect place to hide something, so he looked through them one by one. Then he found it, a dark gray jacket scrunched up behind the boxes, the same jacket worn by the woman in the hat. He resolved to find the hat and the sunglasses. They've got to be around here somewhere. He spotted a box on top of the closet that he couldn't quite get to. He stood on the stool by the dresser and reached up. There, as he had hoped, were the very items he had been searching for. But underneath them, he found something else. It was an anonymous letter. He reads its contents. Come to the jewelry store at 1800, wearing the appropriate attire. As long as you follow the instructions, your identity will be safe. There's no use trying to escape either. We're in control. He took the letter along with the hat and the sunglasses up to the roof. Mary had barely moved an inch. She stood completely still next to the lighthouse monument, a frail and hopeless expression on her face. He showed her what he had found in her room. I know what you've been hiding, he said to her, calm and measured. I know what you've done. The woman in the hat who always makes an appearance before the robberies? That's you, isn't it? In her shock, Mary didn't utter a word. He pressed her. Who put you up to it? Was it the same people who sent you the threatening letters? Mary feigned ignorance, but Hyde quickly presented the proof he had found in her room. Instinctively, she raised her hand to her cheek and let out a sharp gasp. Hyde remembered that he still had a ring, so he showed that to her as well. Betty gave me this to return to you. Why would you sell something so valuable? Or maybe you just like to tell me about the condor engraving on the base? Mary couldn't deal with his rapid-fire questions. She didn't know how to respond. There's no use trying to hide it anymore, Mary. Come clean and tell me. I can't, Mr. Hyde, she said finally. If I do, there's no going back. And you really don't want to hear what kind of person I truly am, Mr. Hyde. You're the one person who can't know. But Mary, if I don't reveal your secret, then sooner or later somebody else will. Do you understand the gravity of the situation? I appreciate that the people ordering you about are intimidating you, but of course I understand, she cried vehemently, and that's precisely why I can't tell you anything. A bitter smile crept onto her face that left Hyde feeling decidedly uneasy. Mary, no! The very second that the possibility occurred to him, Mary was up and running. He chased after her, her legs working faster than he could ever remember, but he knew she would reach the edge of the roof before he did. All hope seemed lost. He almost didn't want to look, but Mary, blessedly, stopped just on the edge instead of jumping. Hyde breathed a sigh of relief, but his heart still pumped violently in his chest. He knew that the danger hadn't passed. All emotion seemed drained from Mary's features. If only I'd met you earlier, Mr. Hyde. If I'd been able to tell you everything I've been keeping to myself, maybe things would have turned out very differently. I really don't know what to do anymore. It's hopeless. Goodbye, Mr. Hyde. Mary! Subtly, in the hope that Mary wouldn't notice, Hyde drew a deep breath and prepared himself to move quickly. Now! With a sudden dramatic leap, he grabbed Mary. The two of them fell in a heap at a short distance from the edge of the roof. Looks like I seriously underestimated what an idiot you were, he raged, dragging her up and making sure she was safely away from the edge. If you wanted my help, why did you just ask? How could I have done that? After all, I'm the only one who knows how terrifying those people can be. But after a series of false starts, Mary finally began to open up. It was these same people, the ones who had sent the threatening letter that had told the insurance company to cease their investigations. It was thanks to them that Mary had last been able to receive her husband's life insurance payout. According to Mary, it was kind of a reward for doing what she was told. She told Hyde that when her brother Mike and her husband Peter worked at Hotel Cape West, their real job was carrying out the sale of stolen jewelry. And it wasn't just that, she said. They were willing to do anything if it got them fast cash, even disposing of dead bodies and making evidence disappear. But once they had outlived their usefulness, the people in charge had seen fit to dispose of them. Mike's death and the resulting insurance payout, her marriage to Peter, the failure of the business, and the accident that subsequently befell him. All of it had been carefully orchestrated. As I was looking through the things I'd brought with me, I found my husband's insurance policy. I decided to claim the money specified within, and so I contacted the company. Very soon after I'd done so, the calls started coming from the people in charge. It wasn't long before they decided it could be of use to them as well. They told me that I had nowhere to run and nowhere to hide, that it was my fate. And who were these people, thought Hyde. Who was it that had been terrorizing Mary? He asked her these questions, and she responded by staring at him with damp eyes. Uncertainty colored her every word. Niall, at least that's the name they use when they refer to themselves. A deep voice reverberated from across the roof. "I see, so that's how it is, huh?" Hyde turned his head and saw that Rex had joined him, and now at last, Rex revealed his true objective. "I'm looking for the last piece of the puzzle. It's the puzzle that I've been left behind and which I've been trying to solve all this time. In fact, I've been piecing it together ever since he died 13 years ago. Are you talking about Jack Green? Hyde asked, the guy who he used to work with. Rex was surprised for a moment and impressed at Hyde for having learned so much about him, but his face was stern as he explained that without a doubt Jack had been killed by Niall. So you're saying he was about to expose the link between Niall and Condor, but Niall got wind of this and decided to silence him for good? With a steady gaze, Rex stated that the truth behind Condor was far more disturbing. The crime syndicate known as Condor began operating in the LA area, almost as far back as maybe 26 years ago. The LAPD figured that Condor was behind the large number of robberies that hit LA, but due to distinct lack of material evidence, was never able to pin any of them. Exactly how they chose their targets and by what means they concluded their sales were done with meticulous detail and went virtually undetected by the police department. Condor always kept itself a few steps ahead, resulting in the LAPD coming up with squat. You're suggesting there was an informant working for inside the LAPD? Growled Hyde. That's what we figured. With nothing that would enable a case to be built against them, the robberies continued. That was until 13 years ago when they simply dropped off the face of the earth. After that, Rex continued. He had tried to write an article about Jack's death being the result of a criminal organization, but it was branded as work of fiction and he was driven out of the profession. Jack's death was ultimately determined to have been an accident. The police stuck to that belief and refused to provide any further assistance. If it really was an intentional police cover-up, the truth would be consigned to darkness forever. That's why he decided to become an insurance fraud investigator. Then he could take a close look at the cases where life insurance policies had been taken out under suspicious circumstances, which included Jack's case. When he first took the job, Rex had the opportunity to go over Jack's policy, as he suspected certain aspects of it seemed decidedly unnatural. He vowed that he would never give up, that he wouldn't let Jack's death be in vain. He would find and uncover the real evil that lay behind his friend's murder. Each word that Rex spoke was punctuated by his fury. "The real evil?" asked Hyde. "Yeah, you didn't think Niall was operating by itself, did you? There are plenty of people working under their influence, each and every one of them connected to Niall, behind the scenes yet operating in plain sight, perverting the course of justice. Even a parasite like me has values, Hyde, things that drive them to keep going, and in my case there's one thing I'll never let slip away. My unfailing persistence to uncover and finally know the truth. Whatever it takes, I will make sure the entire world learns of it." "Jack Green may be dead," said Rex, "but he would continue to fight on his behalf." "Hyde, you may be interested to know that Jack had spent considerable time investigating your father. According to his research, the man whose body was found in the parking lot 25 years ago was in league with Condor and was bumped off because he knew the truth about Niall." "What'd you say?" thundered Hyde. "You think my dad was working for Condor?" Rex brushed aside Hyde's indignation and went on. It was a possibility, he said, at least, according to Jack's research notes, but there was no firm proof. It was impossible, thought Hyde. True, his father had been a criminal, but there was no way he could have been part of such a vile organization. Was there? Well, maybe not, he thought. The only way to be able to find out for sure is if he dug up the truth himself. One undeniable fact was that when your father was killed, the elusive star diamond that Condor had stolen went missing without a trace. For the first time since he had started talking, Rex paused a moment to breathe. "Mary," he turned towards her all of a sudden, "I'll leave you with this piece of advice. Get yourself out of this town. Do it as soon as you can." "I can't just leave, and even if I do you think Niall's just going to forget about me?" "Not without help you, which I intend to give you. Come on, how do you think I've stayed alive this long while looking into them? Even an annoying flaw like me has a few survival tricks up his sleeve. If you want a fighting chance of getting away, be at Union Station at 6 tomorrow morning. I'll wait for 10 minutes. If you don't show by then, I'll be gone." Mary nodded silently. "As for you, Hyde, this is the last I'll be seeing of you, ugly mug." "I'll hold back the tears," said Hyde as Rex disappeared in the elevator. Hyde and Mary were alone again on the roof. Mary, what do you gotta do now? How would she live? He wondered, now that everything was out in the open. He knew that none of it was really her fault, but he worried about her having to try and make do on her own. I'll be just fine. I'm a lot stronger than I look, you know. And one more thing, Mr. Hyde. Thanks for listening to me. I honestly thought I'd never be able to open up to anyone. That is until you came along. And with a goodbye and a wave, she too made her way into the elevator and vanished from sight. Is it really okay to just let her go like this? Mary had danger all around her. That was what made Hyde feel so driven to try and keep her from harm. He had felt it every time she turned away from him. Every time he sensed that the tears were about to well up in her eyes. But at the end, he didn't stop her. He somehow knew she would be all right. His pager beeped. Rachel was trying to get in touch with him. He was alone on the rooftop now, and the chill wind felt harsh against his skin. He decided it was time to go back to his room. When Hyde got to the second floor hallway, he saw that Dylan was pacing him out in front of his door, making his usual excuse that he had been carrying out maintenance work. Dylan mentioned that he had just seen Rex go up to the roof in the elevator. He knew that Mary and Hyde had been up there as well. He begged Hyde to tell him what had happened, but Hyde retorted, "I've got better things to do than listen to your crap, Dylan." He had no intention of discussing the matter with Dylan and simply informed him that Rex would not be showing his face at Cape West again. Dylan asked one more question. What happened regarding Mary's insurance claim? But the answer defied Dylan's expectations. Hyde stated that Mary was definitely going to get her payout, and Dylan walked off with a slightly bemused expression on his face. Hyde went back into his room and dialed Red Crown's number. Rachel picked up and almost instantly said, "I'll hand you over to Ed." "Hyde, it's me," growled Ed. "I've got some news courtesy of an old friend of mine, the LAPD. He said that the LAPD was treating the recent thefts as a warning that Condor may be returning to the scene. The warning was likely Niles' reaction to the campaign against organized crime that mayoral candidate Hugh Speck was planning to embark upon in the new year. Hyde was a little confused. But why would they use the resurrection of Condor as a retaliation against the LAPD? The LAPD must know something about Nile in connection with Condor, something big. There's still plenty of questions on Hyde's mind. He asked Ed if he could get him any more specific information. Listen, Ed, there was a guy 13 years ago who thought he'd discovered a link between Nile and Condor. He wound up dead, but a friend of his told me my dad may have been somehow involved. Okay, I'll see what I can do. Perhaps if I extend the net to include what Frank Raver was doing, we might get lucky. They said their goodbyes and hung up. Hyde checked the time. It was 3 in the afternoon already. The buzzer sounded at the door. Patient as always, he went to see who it was, and he was greeted by one of the more impatient residents of the building. I just heard something from Dylan, spat Frank. He told me that you, Rex, and Mary from Route 206 had a little gathering up on the roof not long ago. Mr. Hyde, I made it quite clear when we spoke last that you were supposed to keep your nose out of these things. I thought we'd reached an agreement that you would no longer interfere. In fact, I distinctly remember telling you to avoid contact with the people in that picture. Hyde certainly remembered Frank telling him that, he said, but he didn't recall agreeing to it. Frank was furious. Oh, you don't, do you? Don't let your desire for truth become between me and my investigation, Mr. Hyde. You and Dylan seem very keen to find out what we were talking about there. Why is that? That's because, he began. Hyde brought up another point. Also, I'd like you to know that I've been looking into you too, Frank. Not only you either. I've done some research on Kathy McGrath's murder that happened here 13 years ago. And last but not least, I've been looking into the elusive Condor. That may be, Mr. Hyde, but there's no way you've been able to obtain the same level of information as me. Hyde refused to rise to the bait, and Frank found his faultless composure unsettling. Tell me then, Mr. Hyde, he eventually responded. What do you know about me? Hyde listed everything he learned about Frank's past, how he had been in the LAPD in his 40s, but was then singled out in an internal investigation, how he had been considered the best of the best in his younger days, but his willingness to do whatever it took to make an arrest was deemed a liability and had been put behind a desk. A look of shock formed on Frank's face, and he asked, How did you come across such detailed information? You don't need to worry about how I came across it, just that I know. Frank dropped that line of questioning and instead asked Hyde what he was investigating. Was he trying to find out the truth behind the murder that took place 13 years earlier? Hyde was, like Frank, looking into an incident from Cape West's past, but he explained the one he was more concerned about occurred 25 years ago. What? Frank was taken aback. Do you know what happened 25 years ago? Asked Hyde. With more than a touch of arrogance, Frank replied, Of course I do, Mr. Hyde. Tell me, what are you trying to discover about the incident 25 years ago? I want to find the Scarlet Star that went missing from Hotel Cape West. Did you say Scarlet Star? Evidently, Frank was aware of it. Mr. Hyde, how the hell do you learn about the Scarlet Star? Frank, you know about the Scarlet Star? Of course I do, said Frank once again in a voice so full of conviction that reminded Hyde of his own days in the police force. If I'm not mistaken, it was kept secured in the safe at Hotel Cape West. Only the hotel manager, Michael McGrath, was likely to know what happened to it. Michael McGrath, huh? Now, Mr. Hyde, can you please tell me how you came to know about the star? I heard it firsthand from Michael McGrath's son. He was the one that sent me after it in the first place. Hyde recounted what Will had told him, and about Michael McGrath revealing the identity of his wife Kathy's murder while on his deathbed. Frank's demeanor cooled somewhat. It would appear that we have a lot to discuss, Mr. Hyde. Frank couldn't spare the time right at the second, however, so they agreed to meet at Lucky's Cafe at 5 o'clock. Not long after Frank had gone back to his own apartment, the telephone started ringing again. When Hyde picked up the receiver, he heard a frightening-sounding female voice. I'm scared, Mr. Hyde. It was Mary. There's somebody outside my room. They've been there for a while now. I think they're keeping tabs on me. I'm so scared. He put the phone down and poked his head out the door to see if anyone was standing in the hallway. Dylan was there, loitering suspiciously close to Mary's room. What are you doing here? Asked Hyde, walking out in the corridor. Despite his typical excuses, Dylan couldn't hide his shock at having been spotted. After failing to provide any kind of satisfactory explanation, he slinked away. Hyde was left with no doubt that Dylan was the one who'd been checking up on Mary. He knocked on Mary's door and told her that it had been Dylan standing outside. Dylan, why would he be hanging around here? He knew you even before coming here. A few days ago, he told me he called to your old place to do some repair work on the pipes. Mary replied that she had always hired the same plumbing company and that they had never sent Dylan. The fear and doubt on her face grew even more pronounced. A thought occurred to Hyde. Mary, I need you to show me something. You remember the threatening letter you received? I need to borrow it. She hurriedly complied and he went to chase after Dylan, leaving Mary without a warning that she shouldn't let anyone into her room until he got back. He carried the letter with him up to the third floor where he pounded hard on the door to room 304. I've got something I want to show you, he said to Dylan when he appeared, but I don't really want to show you here. Let's go inside your room. Trust me, if anyone saw me showing you this, your life wouldn't be worth living. Reluctantly, Dylan invited him in. From the state of the room, it was clear that Dylan was in the middle of packing up his things. Dylan urged Hyde to show him what it was right away since he had somewhere to be, so Hyde wasted no time in presenting him with Mary's letter. Does it look familiar? In case you haven't noticed, it's a threatening letter that was sent to Mary. Dylan just stared at the letter in silence. There's no more hiding, Dylan. I know exactly who you are. You've been keeping tabs on Mary, haven't you? From the way Dylan muttered under his breath, Hyde got the impression the man knew he was beaten. Hyde could just barely hear him say that he had only been doing as he was told. Who is it, Dylan? Who's been giving you your orders? Oh, I can't tell you that, he whined uncertainly. I think I know the answer anyway. It must have been Niall. They told you to keep watch over the other residents and to send them letters. You're right. My job was to stay here and watch over Mary and Miss Patrice. The reason he knew so much about them, he explained, was that Niall had been providing him with information. That was how he had learned that, although Mary's brother and husband had both been members of Condor, Mary had not realized this even after her husband's death. And while Condor had disappeared 13 years earlier, it had left behind two women, Mary and Miss Patrice, that Niall felt they could still be useful to them. Niall's intention was to use Condor as a means of liaising with the LAPD. That was a corrupt element in the force that prevented any of Condor's members from ever being arrested. After listening to Dylan tell him all this, Hyde said, So in the end, you're just one of Niall's underlings. Dylan nodded and said he wasn't deeply entangled in Niall's activities or anything. All he did was receive information and orders from them. That he just had to hang around and watch people and write a few threatening letters, and the pay was incredible for such a simple job. But, said Dylan to Hyde, now was starting to feel like the right time to bow out. He'd gotten the sense that if he involved himself in Niall any further, things could get dangerous. All he had left to do was report his findings. Hyde shook his head. You're going to tell them that I've blown your cover, but what's going to happen to you? You really think they're going to keep bother keeping you around if you can't even remain disguised? Mark my words, based on the Niall I know, this isn't going to end well. You'll be the first one they silence. Hyde wasn't trying to threaten Dylan, he just wanted him to know all the facts. Well, what can I do? Asked Dylan, panic-stricken. Let's make a deal. Until I move out, I won't say anything about you to anyone, and that'll give you a couple of days head start to escape somewhere. Dylan wasn't sure he could trust Hyde, but Hyde had it all planned out. I know a way you can escape undetected. Whether you choose to believe me or not is totally your call, though. It all happened in a split second. Dylan's right arm moved like a flash, and suddenly Hyde found himself in the sights of a gun. What you said sounds good, but I'm not so sure I'm the kind of guy who believes everything at face value. I'm going to have to think about all this. That stuff you said, that's something I can't decide upon lightly. After all, both our lives are in danger here. Dylan kept the gun aimed at Hyde until he was out the door, leaving Hyde alone. Hyde headed straight back to Mary's room and told her everything. Dylan was behind the threatening letter you received. He was also the person keeping tabs on your whereabouts. So Dylan was his Niall? Yeah, but I managed to scare him a little. It should be enough to keep him away until you're safely out of town. He handed the letter back to her. As soon as I leave here, lock the door and don't let anyone in. You got that? And when you leave tomorrow, don't tell a soul what you're doing. He looked into her eyes and then made his decision. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to see you off tomorrow. He explained that if he made any kind of movement, Dylan was likely to as well. The only way to ensure that Mary could escape unharmed was to keep his hands off. There's Rex, too. He might still have something up his sleeve. I understand. He placed the check for the $1,000 into her hands. There's still a chance that something might happen before you get out of town. You better take this just in case. Mary shook her head and made to give it back to him. I can't possibly accept this, Mr. Hyde. But he put his hand around hers and closed her hand over the check. Mary, listen. It's the least I can do. Just smile and take it, all right? You may put on a brave face all that time, but you might not be as tough abroad as you make it out. For a single moment, the two of them stood perfectly still and gazed in each other's eyes. Then Mary's lips formed two delicate words. Thank you. Hyde left and Mary quietly locked the door. Now at last it was 4 o'clock, the time that Mags had agreed to meet with him. He made his way down to the lobby and knocked on her door. He heard her voice from inside the room. I'm sorry, Mr. Hyde, I'm a little busy at the moment. Can we continue our chat from this morning another time? Well, I couldn't exactly force her to talk to him. He'd just have to come back later. With a sigh, he set up back to his room. On the way, he was accosted by Frank Raver. You were in Dylan's room earlier, am I right? He looked quite agitated when he left. Dylan's on Niall's payroll. Once I managed to get that out of him, he fled. Frank had suspected that Dylan was involved somehow. He had noticed that all of Dylan's movements seemed deliberately planned to match up with Mags. But why Mags? Think about it. Miss Patrice's late husband, George, was a close friend of Michael McGrath, the one-time owner of the Hotel Cape West. He also just happened to be the prime suspect in the murder of Kathy McGrath. Moreover, I firmly believe that he knew the whereabouts of the Scarlet Star that went missing 25 years ago. Now wait just a minute, Hyde interjected. Didn't you tell me that the hotel manager, Michael McGrath, was the only person who knew the whereabouts of the Scarlet Star? Michael McGrath was the only one who knew its location as such, but he sold the hotel to Miss Patrice 13 years ago, and I'm positive that he would have left some sort of means to locate the Scarlet Star later on. He must have figured that at some point somebody would try to obtain it. So he thought someone would come after it? Yes, the same people that knew the truth behind his disappearance. Condor ringleader George Patrice and his wife Margaret, Mike Porter and Peter Reve too. Naturally, Niall would have been aware as well. Amongst those, the only two to survive up until the present day are Miss Patrice and Niall. Hyde had a sudden realization. Frank, there's one more person who knew about the disappearance of the Scarlet Star. You! How do you even know about it? Start talking. Okay, I'll tell you. The reason I've been looking into the events of this building's past is to restore my reputation. 25 years earlier, Frank Raver had been investigating Condor. During the course of his investigation, he learned that Hotel Cape West was where Condor conducted their sales of stolen jewelry. Soon after that, however, the LAPD ran an internal investigation that resulted in Frank being pulled off the case. It was a plot to remove the person poised to unveil the truth about Condor. Not only did he ruin my good name, but he also deepened his allegiance with Niall. This person, the one who orchestrated the conspiracy. Pressed Hyde, are you talking about Hugh Speck? Correct. I'll tell you now, my ultimate aim is to bring him and his corruption down. If I could do that, I have no doubt my reputation will be restored. Let me get this straight. Your reason for searching for dirt on Hugh Speck is to try and expose the link between Niall and the LAPD? Frank nodded. Exactly. I'm positive, Mr. Hyde, that the Scarlet Star lays hidden somewhere in this building. If only I can find it, I know it'll prove to be an invaluable piece of evidence. Michael McGrath definitely left some sort of clue behind before he died. Something that will enable me to finish what I've been trying to do all these years. Hyde could practically smell Frank's determination. This man would never back down before achieving his goal. And where do you think you're going to find this clue? Frank's conclusion was that it was only be in one of two places, either somewhere on the 4th floor that he hadn't checked yet, or in Mag's room. And on that note, Frank had a proposition for Kyle. Mr. Hyde, would you be so willing to team up with me so we can search Miss Patrice's room? Seriously? Hyde was taken aback, but he realized from the look in Frank's eye that he wasn't joking. You're the only one I can talk to candidly regarding this. Hyde decided he'd at least hear the man out, so he asked how they go about such a thing. Frank pointed out that Mags had no idea he had been looking into Condor. His plan was to ask Mags to come to the cafe for a chat, giving Hyde an hour or so to search her room. Let's give it a try, Mr. Hyde. I'll make sure she leaves the door unlocked, and then you can just walk right in. Guess it's settled then. I'll go in the cafe as soon as I'm done searching. After that, we can discuss whatever I found. Frank nodded and made his way to Mags' apartment. Hyde went up the first flight of stairs and listened to Frank and Mags. Yes, I understand. Then let's go to the cafe. The two voices trailed off into the distance, along with accompanying footsteps. Hyde gingerly went back down to double-check that they had gone to the cafe, and then he crept into Mag's room, careful to open the door as quietly as he could. To his relief, Mags had indeed left it unlocked. He went through the entryway in the sitting room all the way into Mags' bedroom. After quickly casting eyes around the entire room, he decided to start researching around the area around the desk. His curiosity was piqued by the torn scrap of paper he spotted on the floor underneath it. The message appeared to be incomplete, but he read what was there. We know everything. Leave this apartment and its secrets immediately. Knowledge doesn't forget and still bears a grudge against the wife of George Patrice. This must be one of the threatening letters Mags received. Hyde took another glance around and noticed the wooden closet stood against the wall. He threw open the doors and inside he found a curious box wrapped in a white cloth. It certainly looked like it might be important. He opened it to reveal that it was a music box. He peered at the inside and noticed something odd. The rotating drum had a key inserted through the middle of it. It looked like he'd be able to get it out with a little effort, however. He just had to get the timing exactly right. There's a pin that could push the key out of the music box, but only work if the drum had rotated the exact point in which there was a gap above the key. Taking great care with delicate machinery, he waited for the two parts to line up and then manipulated the lever connecting to the pin. The king sprang upward. He picked it up and looked at it properly for the first time. It was engraved with the condor emblem. It was too soon to tell what it might unlock, but he put it in his pocket for now, just in case. He took a thorough look around, just in case he could find any other clues that might lead to the Scarlet Star, but nothing else drew any attention to itself. His hour was nearly up as well. He went back outside. He was just in time. The moment he had closed the door, Mags came out of Lucky's cafe. She instantly apologized for being unable to talk to him earlier. When Hyde suggested they'd still like to speak to her at some point, she agreed to talk to him later and went back inside her room. Hyde was eager to tell Frank what he had discovered. He went to the cafe where Frank was waiting impatiently for him. "Ah, Mr. Hyde, how'd it go?" "I didn't find anything left behind by Michael, but it wasn't a total waste of time. I found this." He got the key out of his pocket. "It's a key with a condor mark on it." "Give it here, Mr. Hyde, and you should avoid trying to go any further in this investigation." Hyde was defiant. "Sorry to disappoint you, but I've got plenty of things I still want to investigate. I have a feeling the key's going to open more than simply a door. If I'm lucky, it might even reveal some of the secrets around here. But if Hyde intended to search the fourth floor again," said Frank, "he would be wasting his time. Frank had already searched it thoroughly. Just because you haven't managed to find anything doesn't mean I won't. I've got a feeling I'm going to get lucky up there." "Oh, what the hell, it's no use talking to you. Do whatever you like." As Frank was about to leave, Hyde took the opportunity to ask what Frank and Mags had been talking about. "It was nothing important. We just took the opportunity to do a spot of complaining. Oh, and it seems she was already aware of Dylan leaving, but she's got no idea he's with Niall." Frank said his piece and left, and Hyde was joined in the cafe by Tony. "Didn't think you and old man Raver would be the sort to sit down together for drinks," said Tony, who had just caught the parting words of Hyde and Frank's conversation. "Yeah, well, we had things to discuss." "Anyway, Hyde, I've got some good news. That song of mine you listen to, there's buzz about it all over. It's so popular that I'm going to get to release it as a single." Tony exuded pure joy. He thanked Hyde, saying that he wouldn't have been able to do this without his help. "I want to find a way to show my gratitude. Anything you want, consider it done. Just say the word." Hyde considered his offer for a moment, then said, "Say, Tony, you mind helping me look for something?" Hyde let Tony in on the details. He told him about the precious Scarlet Star diamond that had been hidden somewhere in the building 25 years ago. Flames started burning in Tony's eyes. "You think I'd pass up on the chance to get an action like this?" They managed to meet up in front of the fire door on the fourth floor, and Tony did his best to look inconspicuous as he left the cafe. Hyde left it as a minute or two before following him. They reconvened on the fourth floor. They had a problem, however. The electricity had been cut, so none of the lights would turn on. It was so dark that they couldn't see a thing. Besides, even if they could resolve the slight issue, they didn't have the keys to any of the rooms. "Hang on," exclaimed Tony as he remembered something. "Doesn't Dylan have his own set? He said he needed them to do all this maintenance on the fourth floor." Hyde made a quick trip down to Dylan's room, where he had a little trouble finding the exact bunch of keys that Tony had been talking about. He must have left it there when he fled. Meanwhile, Tony went down to the basement, where Hyde thought he had seen a flashlight in the storage room. Once they had gathered these essential tools, they regrouped. They began their slow, careful search of the rooms on the fourth floor. Looking around each one with the flashlight, they gradually moved closer and closer towards room 406. They found the right key on the bundle Dylan had left in the room and inserted it into the lock that stood between them and room 406. The door creaked as it opened. They made their way cautiously into the pitch-black room, their way only dimly lit by the glow of the flashlight. Once they were deep inside, they cast their light across the room. The beam illuminated a large safe with a combination lock. "Hey, do you think it could be in here?" asked Tony, fraught with tension. "That diamond you were talking about." Hyde grabbed the handle and tried to open it, but as he had suspected, it wasn't going to be that easy. "It's no good. This thing's not going to open." "Maybe a crowbar will do the trick. You stay here. I'll go and grab one." And Tony left to do exactly that. As Hyde stood alone in the oppressive void, he wondered had Michael McGrath really left a vital clue on the fourth floor? Countless other questions raced through his mind. Where could the Scarlet Star be hidden? And when he finally found it, would it finally shed some light on the truth they had so longed to uncover? While he was waiting there for Tony to come back, Hyde started to feel like the air had changed in the room. Then he became more certain. Someone was behind him. He knew it. Figured it must be Tony. He went to turn around, but as soon as he did, he was sprayed in the face with something. The moment he drew his next breath, he was overcome by strong drowsiness. What was... As he lost consciousness, he struggled to see who had attacked him, but before he could make them out, awareness deserted him. Notes concerning Kyle Hyde, Part 9, Detective Hyde's Case Files. I'm currently researching Kyle Hyde's many achievements as an officer of the NYPD's 89th Precinct. He was on the force for approximately 8 years, and while it would of course be impossible to find out everything that happened to him during that time, I would nonetheless like to learn as many small details as I can about his former life as a detective. As part of my investigation, I have come into the knowledge of certain details regarding Brian Bradley, another former detective whose name had appeared repeatedly in my notes, where I have typically described him as Kyle's partner. Bradley and Kyle were both in the police force when the organized crime syndicate known as NILE was being investigated in 1976. Bradley went undercover as part of the investigation, but he was secretly feeding information to NILE, and when the NYPD ultimately realized that he had betrayed them, they went after him. The last police officer to see him was his close friend Kyle, who had apprehended him on a pier. Bradley was shot by Kyle and he fell into the water. He remains missing to this day. I spoke to Willie Taylor, who was supervising to both of them at the time, about Kyle and Bradley's relationship and the aforementioned incident with Bradley. All these years later, I still believe Hyde never had a better partner than Bradley. They were eternal rivals and unbeatable allies, and that's what you really need in a partner. When Bradley was going to go undercover, no one was more against it than Hyde. And when the investigation started, no one provided more logistical support than Hyde either. That's why when it turned out Bradley was ratting us out, everyone could see the bitterness and rage in his eyes. When I heard that Hyde had shot Bradley, I wasn't surprised at the least. I know exactly what I was thinking, that no one could take Bradley down with him. That's why nobody stopped him. When we didn't find Bradley's body after he fell off that pier, and the higher-ups told us to shut down the investigation anyway for whatever reason, Hyde handed in his badge straight away and said he was going to find his partners by himself, and nobody tried to get in his way. I knew there must be something more behind what Bradley did, and I knew Hyde was the only one who would be able to find out the real story. In the end, Hyde learned the truth behind Bradley's betrayal and disappearance at a hotel on the outskirts of LA 3 years after leaving the NYPD. Detective Taylor was also kind enough to tell me about the first time that Kyle and Bradley worked together. The first case they ran was an investigation of a group of art thieves. The scene of the crime was this art museum in Tribeca neighborhood. I think they stole a painting of Osterzone. What was it called? Oh yeah, now I remember. It was called Angel Opening a Door. Osterzone was this genius artist who died pretty young. I remember hearing at the time that painting was worth an absolute fortune. According to Detective Taylor, Kyle and Bradley tried to ascertain the means by which the criminals had been able to sneak into the art museum late at night, but they were unable to find any trace. It was then that they conceived of a different method of investigation. They went to the museum one night at the same time they conjectured that the thieves had broken in, and investigated the surroundings thoroughly while the lights were off. In doing so, they discovered a secret code drawn in ink on the floor. It was hard to make out in the darkness, but the symbol almost looked like a hummingbird. Bradley had been trained in code breaking, and he managed to determine what the symbol meant, and thus revealing the criminal's method of intrusion. Although the code seemed complicated at first, in the end it was simply as following the directions the hummingbird's beak was pointing. Soon the mystery was solved. It turned out that the thieves had been breaking in via the service elevator, which was used to move the works of art in the museum. But that wasn't all. They came to realize that if one pressed the button to stop the elevator while it was between the fourth and fifth, a secret door would open that was embedded in the wall. It was an incredibly complicated method of breaking in, and the two police officers wouldn't help admiring the unexpected attention to detail and organizational skills of the criminal group. The perpetrators still got away, though. They didn't get the Osterzone painting back either, of course, but that was the only one. Hyde and Bradley solved every other case they worked on together. Every single one. After he told me this story, Taylor handed me a photograph. It was the only photo he had of Kyle Hyde and Brian Bradley together. I'll let you have it if you're really going to be writing a book about Hyde. You better write about Bradley, too. If Bradley ends up reading it, I bet he'll try and get in contact with Hyde, as long as he still thinks of Hyde as his partner, at least. The photo I was given that day now adorns my desk as I prepare to begin writing the story of Kyle Hyde. With all the material I've gathered, it might prove to become a very lengthy tale indeed.